Matthew Moore's MM with Steel. Today is Sunday, August 13th, which means it's time for another shop update. All right, there's been a lot going on in the shop, the culmination of which is the base glued up, and she looks fantastic. I mean, take a look at these shots of the base. I just think the form just looks fantastic here, and it's just gonna be a great base for this slab that's gonna go on top. It's gonna be an awesome coffee table up in the house upstairs. Now the base is done, I can move on to flattening the top, and that's next week. So before we get into that, let's talk about what happened this week in the shop. So to get here, I had to start with prepping my pieces. Now, most of these parts had some type of void in them somewhere. So I got some epoxy, tinted it black, and filled those voids. Now, the big thing you have to remember when you're filling voids is don't go too deep. So if the void is really deep, I would say anywhere more than 1/4 of an inch, you want to do it in multiple phases. And the reason for that is that if you try to do all that at once, it's not going to harden. So after all of my epoxy that hardened with a card scraper, I removed that material and got that back down to the same level as the parts themselves. And it was time to start the prep work for sanding this up. So first off, I found where I wanted to drill all the holes for the screws that can hold the tabletop to the base. Once I found those locations, I went over to the drill press and used a Forstner bit to drill a hole that was slightly wider than the washer I'm going to use. And then I came back in with a bit that was wider in diameter than the screw I'm going to use, and that will allow the screw to pivot and move as the tabletop expands and contracts as well as the parts do. Now that this was done, I could start sanding. So I got my sander out and I started sanding all of my parts. Of course, all the way up to the grits, I did 100, 150, and 220, and I hand sanded the end grain that's showing to 320. Now, with this round over here, I have a video which I'll have a link in the description below, and I'll have it up here as well. I did a quick tip in the past where I showed you how to use an Abernet pad, or how I use an Abernet pad to sand over my roundovers, and that's what I did here as well. So this 1/2 inch of foam is great because it'll just curve to the piece as well, and then rounded over all my edges with a router, touched those up with a little bit of sandpaper, and then it was time to glue this bad boy up. Now I did this in sections. So first I did the back piece to the stretcher, and then once that had settled for a little bit, then I moved on to these cantilevered supports, and once those had settled for a little bit, then I moved on to this angled support, and once that had settled for a little bit, then I moved on to this upper support here in the front that's gonna grab this section of the tabletop and lock that in by screwing into it. So over the course of an entire day, I glued this up, but I gave some time in between everything. Now, the big thing here is when you're doing a project that has this type of bridal joinery and you are as exact as I am being, down to thousandths of inch, you want to make sure that you move really quickly when you're gluing these up, because you can definitely lock this joint up. That's the last thing you want to do. So I use glue. I used Type-On 3, which has a little bit longer of an opening time. If you build this project and you are, somewhere where it's too hot, there's just conditions in the shop that may cause the Type-On 3 to cure faster, then it may be preferable to move to an epoxy instead that has a really long open time. Or maybe a wood glue like Old Brown or something like that, where if something happened, you could reverse by using heat the glue itself and take everything out. So just make sure you have something that has a long enough opening time for what you're doing. And of course, dry fit this and make sure that you can get it actually to close just the way you want without too much craziness going on. So that is pretty much where I'm at. Oh yeah, and then when I was sanding, I stay away from the edges of the bridle joints, and that's really important because I want a really tight fit, and if I sand into the area where it has been depressed because the joints are coming together, then I may remove material that will cause that joint to have a gap instead of a gap-free joint, which is what I want. So with some blue tape and some sandpaper, I come back in and sand to the edges of all of my bridle joints. And that's pretty much it. The base is up. That's the big stuff this week. I can't wait to start on the actual flattening for the top itself. So as always, please subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, and hit that thumbs up button if you like this video. If you're watching this on Facebook, hit the like button, share your timeline, and head over to the MM Wood Studio page and like us there as well. And as always, have a great week in your shop.